Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to the eighth and final webinar in the 2025-2026 FCM Collective series. Our session today is entitled What to Do About the Resilience Infrastructure Funding Gap, and is presented in partnership with co-operators and Addenda Capital. As we enter what is forecast to be a challenging flooding season in Eastern Ontario and in other regions, this topic feels particularly timely. And of course, wildfire season is not far behind. Through today's session, we aim to provide municipalities with practical options and ideas for addressing funding gaps so that they can get to work strengthening their communities against these and other climate-related risks. My name is Evan Clark. I'm the Manager of Partnerships and Sponsorships with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. As FCM moves forward with our commitment to reconciliation, I want to acknowledge that FCM's head office is located on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. As an organization, FCM endeavors to unlearn colonial mindsets and practices, grow in knowledge, and adapt our ways of working. As we continue to build meaningful relationships, we recognize the historic and ongoing contributions of Indigenous peoples and honor their leadership and partnership in shaping and strengthening communities across the country. I welcome you to acknowledge the land you are joining us from. Now, before I turn things over to the experts, I have a few housekeeping matters to attend to. Premièrement, l'interprétation simultanée est disponible pour notre session aujourd'hui. Pour accéder à l'audio en français, il faut simplement cliquer la petite icône du globe au bas de l'écran vers la droite et sélectionner le français. If you do not select a language, you will hear the live audio in English. Je vous donne quelques secondes pour faire le choix de langue. On our last webinar, a few participants reported an echo. If you're hearing an echo, please double check that you do not have the webinar open in a web browser or a second Zoom tab. If you'd like to ask a question today, please use the QA pane in the bottom in the Zoom platform. That's at the bottom of your screen. We plan to leave ample time for questions and comments, contributions to our conversation today, and we hope to do that towards the end of the session. So please use that pane to engage with our panel of experts. Now, finally, please note this session is being recorded and will be available on demand on the FCM website. Now I'll turn things over to the experts, but first, a quick introduction for today's moderator, Don Iveson. Don is an executive advisor at Co-operators Resilience Acceleration Lab, where he works to help catalyze private capital for community climate adaptation. As mayor of Edmonton from 2013 to 2021, he was a driving force behind the creation of Edmonton's Climate Forward City Plan, as well as nation-leading climate adaptation investments in stormwater flood management. He now leverages his deep experience in municipal governments to build bridges between government, industry, and the financial sector to solve complex climate challenges. Don also dedicates time to housing issues as co-chair of the Alliance to End Homelessness and as chair of the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. Over to you to get things going, Don.
Merci, Evan, and bienvenue tout le monde. It's great to be with you all here. Thank you for taking time to join us for an important discussion on the front end of what may or may not be another record-setting year in severe weather in this country. Either way, we need to get ready, and we know that the trend lines are especially challenging for communities of all shapes and sizes, coast to coast to coast. We're going to hear from two communities today who are taking incredible creative leadership approaches to dealing with severe weather risk affecting their communities. And so I'm really excited for you to meet Reeve Garonsky from the rural municipality of Stewartburn in Manitoba, and Patrick Kelly, who's the CFO at the township of Mapleton in Ontario, as part of today's discussion. They're going to share reflections on the challenges that their communities are facing, as well as the creative solutions that they have pursued and will pursue to manage those challenges proactively. And this is incredible leadership that we're privileged to profile as part of Co-operators' work at our Resilience Accelerator Lab. Both of these municipalities, both of these municipal leaders were successful applicants in our recent call for proposals. And so we congratulate them both. And this is an opportunity to platform the leadership that's happening out there already in this country, which Co-operators and our lab is looking to assist and accelerate. We're also going to hear from Yi Lu from the Green Municipal Funds program at FCM. And as Evan noted, I spent a lot of time with this organization, have great affection for FCM and GMF and the leadership and support that it provides. Municipalities in this country are stronger when we're working together, urban and rural, large and small. And what I really appreciate about today's discussion as a former big city mayor is I always had the sense that there was at least more nimbleness, if not sometimes greater creativity from smaller communities. Like large organizations like the one I led have a ton of capacity, but they also have an incredible amount of inertia. And so I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to help introduce you to these leaders from smaller communities whose nimbleness and creativity is the kind of inspiration we need coast to coast to coast in communities of all sizes. So I'm going to invite each of them to briefly introduce themselves, starting with Reeve Goronsky.
Good morning from sunny Manitoba. And welcome everyone. And it's a pure pleasure to be a part of this. Thank you so very much, Dawn. I'm the Reeve of a very small municipality. We have about 1,800 ratepayers in the community, but we expand mainly with water, rocks, and lots of trees. So in trying to figure out what you do with floodwaters every year, we have natural bogs and swamps. And so we're thinking outside the box. So thank you so very much for inviting me today.
And when we come to Reeve Goronsky, those nature-based solutions are keep coming up in this work, and it's going to trust me, stick around for what she's going to share. It's really inspiring stuff. Next up is Mr. Kelly.
Thanks, Don. Patrick Kelly. I'm a CPA, CFO for municipality in southwestern Ontario, a small rural municipality. Just over 20 years of experience in municipal finance, all aspects of it. But a big component of that is finding unique solutions to complex issues that I've been able to bring forward throughout the years. Most recently, the establishment of a municipal service corporation for our community that let us move forward on some key items. Happy to be here today and share our story, the steps we took to move forward on something that's been long awaited for the community, and looking forward to connecting with everyone. So thank you.
Well, thank you both for being here. And it's great to have a political perspective and an administrative leadership perspective on this panel today, too. And last but not least, and we're going in reverse order of the presentations, but Yi, go ahead.
Hi, Yi Lu. I'm Director of Community Efficiency and Leverage Programs with the Green Municipal Fund. So I work with the teams here at GMF that support municipalities on key sustainability priorities, such as sustainable affordable housing, retrofit financing, and most relevant to the conversation today, around the area of our adaptation program, focused on really figuring out how to get more private investments into resilient infrastructure and projects. So really looking forward to this conversation.
So just before I turn it back to Yi to frame it from a GMF perspective, I'll just offer a little bit more context about why Co-operators is interested in this work and providing leadership from our CEO and our board, who are really committed to trying to find creative ways for not just insurers, but investors, pension funds, insurers who have to invest funds and other sources of capital to get involved in bolstering community resilience. For us, it's simple. Our purpose is financial security for Canadians and their communities. And as a cooperative that's owned by over 1 million Canadians, indirectly through various other co-ops and credit unions, we feel very close to that purpose, and we see climate change as a direct threat particularly the severe weather and losses, not just because they drive claims for insurers, but because they disrupt well-being, they disrupt investment, and they disrupt conditions for business and infrastructure. And so on so many fronts, the changing weather and exponentially increasing losses represent a threat to that purpose. And so that's why considerable resources have been committed to our lab to support solving for how to bring private capital constructively to the table. And it's not for a minute to displace the much needed grant dollars that are available through programs like DMAF or the Build Back Better provisions under the newly revised disaster financial assistance arrangements. The point is that there will just likely never be enough of that. And if we wait for grants, then we won't, because the amount of dollars that are available from senior orders of government are just a drop in the bucket, really, compared to the work that's needed in the coming decades to fortify our communities against these risks proactively. So we want to come as partners. We want to bring dollars that can achieve returns and get creative about how those returns come, whether it's from nature-based solutions, whether it's from water security, source water security improvements, whether it's for risk reduction that insurers can recognize and reflect in pricing going forward, so that there's at least some closure in the loop. To reward municipalities who take action, who take leadership, who mobilize resources. And so it's a lot of work to do, but we've got a great team at the lab that's been partnering with GMF for many years to try to solve this problem together, as well as now these municipalities from the call for proposals. So I'm going to turn it back to Yi to set the table a little bit. I may have just stolen a little bit of his thunder, but we'll get the official FCM perspective as well. And then we'll turn to Patrick to talk a little bit about the challenges they've faced, what they're doing about it. And then we'll come back to Reeve Goronsky for a really inspiring case study as well. So Yi, over to you.
John. Yeah, very much aligned in terms of the FCM perspective. I would say over the past few years, there's really that growing understanding and experience within our local communities around that disruptive consequence of climate change. So adaptation and really the need to invest in adaptation. I think that realization that there is a cost to inaction, as well as the benefits of being proactive. So recent research published by the Canadian Climate Institute with support from FCM, Climate Proof Canada, and Insurance Bureau of Canada, one of the key messages coming out of that report is that on an annual basis, there is, in the order of $4 billion of annual savings for taking reactive adaptation investments, and that increases to $9 billion in annual savings if you're proactively investing in adaptation. So it really speaks to that requirement that Don was mentioning around that greater investment by all orders of government in adaptation projects and infrastructure. And really the parallel to that and complementary is the recognition that public dollars alone is not sufficient. And really, it should not be on the shoulders of the public sector and the public dollars alone to solve these issues, given just the societal-wide impacts and value from doing this right. There is when we, as all the stakeholders involved, invest in adaptation, there is real value created. So for every dollar spent today on adaptation, there is returns of $13 to $15 in future years through direct and indirect savings and benefits. So there really is a complementary place for private investments alongside with all the other capital that we need to do this well. The reality is, today, there is very limited private investment in municipal adaptation. And like any good problem worth tackling, the reasons are multifaceted. So on the project level, it's really helping the municipalities work on the appropriate hazards for their local context at the right scale, whether it's at the asset level, community, across jurisdictions. And these are complex projects, often involving multiple stakeholders and diffuse and difficult to monetize benefits. This, I think, speaks a lot to some of the challenges of getting private investments. Is there are real benefits in terms of avoided losses, service continuity, and operational savings, but those are hard to pull into a repayment cash flow that's really necessary. And for municipalities, I think when looking for external capital, there has been a traditional, I guess, move or seeking of grant-based funding for these types of projects. So not as much familiarity and expertise around project financing with private sector and some real and perceived legislative and procurement barriers. So those are some of the challenges involved for municipalities. And then on the other side of the equation, I guess for the private sector, I think Don really outlined well kind of that purpose-aligned reason that private sector may want to invest in these important projects within the Canadian communities. Ultimately, as businesses and investors, they do require that market rate return. So we very much get back to kind of the complexity of these projects and the need for that clear and predictable repayment. And it kind of represents a gap that exists today that we're really trying to resolve and figure out together. Back over to you, Don.
Thank you. And there's lots of room for creativity in everything that you just said, which is also why it's challenging, but also why, whole of society partnerships like this conversation, template what's necessary. I think about the fact that so many of the benefits of prevention, that delta of $5 billion, if municipalities take action and reduce risk, according to that Canadian Climate Institute Summit, some of those benefits, a lot of them would go to senior orders of government through health benefits, reduced evacuation costs, disaster mop-up costs that are avoided. And so there's clearly a role for senior orders of government in helping bring those benefits forward through grants and concessionary support for communities to take this action. But there's also benefits to municipalities themselves in terms of unrecoverable costs, damage to infrastructure, implications for economic development. If you keep getting hit over and over, it's hard to attract new investment to the community unless action is being taken to de-risk those investments for those asset owners or prospective investors. And then there's all the folks who own things in the community, homes, land, factories, farms, and those people's assets are also at risk. And so they have an interest too. So how do you rally some or all of those? The Canadian Climate Institute talks about 15-to-1 benefits for taking action in this area. The problem is they're very disaggregated. So it takes a lot of creativity to find, 2 or 3-to-1 that you can build into a funding program. And but thankfully, we've got folks like Patrick and Reeve Goronsky who are open to that kind of creativity, and we thank them for their applications and their leadership and their vision and identifying their communities to partner with the lab and with others to solve for this. And so let's hear from Patrick about how they're thinking about these challenges and approaching them in Mapleton.
Sure, thanks, Don. Yeah, so as I said before, Mapleton, we're a rural community within southwestern Ontario, predominantly vast farm fields. Agriculture is our main industry out here. But amidst that and traditional rural setup, we are experiencing increasing development pressures, as it is pretty much everywhere in Ontario right now, to accommodate housing targets and expand opportunities for industrial or commercial investment to drive the economy of our community. So like many small municipalities, we're trying to balance that growth with affordability, recognizing infrastructure constraints, and ultimately that broader lens of climate resiliency. So we needed to, as the word's been said a bunch of times here, needed to be creative in achieving the goals of the community that has a relatively small assessment base. We don't have the major urban dollars available through a large assessment. And we also have a very lean staffing model here. So there's not a lot of resources dollar-wise or staffing-wise to drive the community forward. So the greatest challenge that we had in growing over the past several years has been limited wastewater capacity. So our existing systems, we got a lagoon system out here. It lacks sufficient capacity to accommodate any future growth, particularly within our main settlement areas of Drayton and Moorfield. So without that additional capacity in place, new housing or employment development was constrained completely. Growth targets became increasingly difficult to meet. And that lack of servicing capacity directly impacted the affordability for new homeowners and our overall economic competitiveness within our community. So the challenge, I'll be pretty clear, the challenge was not a result of poor planning by the municipality, but I think it clearly reflects the cost and scale of linear infrastructure in small rural communities where large capital investments are needed to serve relatively small populations. So the challenge was put before us. In order to accommodate it, the growth pressures, we're looking at over $40 million of short-term capital investments. Again, Mapleton's a community of 11,000 residents. $40 million across 11,000 residents is quite the challenge. All of those are largely tied to growth-related water and wastewater projects. From a climate lens, one of the 3 projects that are part of it is actually moving an existing wastewater pumping station out of the floodplain onto land that won't be impacted by future flooding within our community. For a municipality of our size, though, this level of capital pressure exceeds what we could reasonably manage through like the traditional debt or development charges regime in Ontario. And it also creates tension for council and the community on what we put towards servicing growth and what we're putting towards maintaining affordability for our existing residents. So forced us to ask ourselves the hard question, like, are there different ways that we could deliver essential infrastructure while still protecting the current and future ratepayers? So with that, we began to explore alternative financing models, traditional municipal finance tools like grants that we've talked about here, or use of reserves, or debentures. Remain important, but they're no longer sufficient on their own. Like we said, the grant funding is starting to dry up a little bit. There's questions around the ability for us to collect and utilize development charges. So we looked at models that could, one, it could accelerate that infrastructure delivery. 2, it could spread the costs more equitably over time. And then ultimately, the biggest piece is we wanted to maintain public ownership and accountability. We weren't going to privatize the entire water and wastewater system. So then enter the option we went with, which was establishing a municipal service corporation as an innovative project delivery financing tool. With the MSC in place, we could develop our own infrastructure in a more flexible, I would say more business-oriented framework. Provides greater flexibility in financing with longer terms, options available by going into the private market outside of the traditional municipal financing restrictions. It also enabled us as an added benefit to establish a skills-based board of directors, and this is nothing against you, Reeve, or any elected officials, but it's nice to have that diversity of viewpoints and expertise on the board with the single focus of water and wastewater, not spread out across all the different service areas. So the key piece in that, though, assets remain publicly owned. Our council is the 100% shareholder of the corporation. And the model that we put in aligns infrastructure costs more directly with those that are going to benefit from the growth. So we stood up that company in April of last year, or corporation. Northern Maple Utilities is what it's called. I'll probably put a link in. You can read about. We're very transparent with what we did. So it's all above board, and the whole story from start to finish is on there. But then looking ahead, our next challenge, or biggest challenge that's still there, still apparent in the community, is flooding, overland flooding within our downtown core. So as a large municipality, we face increased flood risk for our municipally owned infrastructure. Again, for our agricultural lands, which I think was talked about before, the impact on our farming economy here, and then the residents and businesses that are downtown within the floodplain. So the exponential increase in climate events that has been happening that can't be managed by our existing asset management plan framework. The impacts are just getting to be far too great. So Financial challenges traditionally limited the ability to move ahead on these flood resilience and climate adaptation initiatives, but then enter some of these alternative financing tools that we've talked about. So we do have increased risk still on our roads, our drainage system, those ag lands. But given our success in building a sustainable financial model for water and wastewater, we're looking into doing something similar on the resilience infrastructure side. We've experienced how partnering with the private sector might just allow us to address the climate risk again more proactively than reactively, putting some investment dollars into increasing our climate resilient infrastructure. And we think there's a good chance of being successful. Obviously, partnering with the lab here is going to get us moving forward, expediting the process of reviewing the potential models, what can be done. And I'm confident we were successful in doing it on water and wastewater. I'm confident that this community will see the value in doing it on the climate resilient infrastructure side. So with that, I would say this is a reality facing small and mid-sized communities across the country. The infrastructure costs are rising much faster than traditional funding tools can manage. So we need to explore some of these alternative financing models to position ourselves to grow more responsibly, maintain and protect our existing ratepayers, and build the infrastructure systems that aren't just adequate for today, but infrastructure systems that are resilient for the future. So that's kind of where we're at, what we've done in Mapleton, what's been successful, and where we're looking to go on the climate resilience side of things. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Don.
Well, that's amazing, Patrick. And you mentioned on a previous conversation that you've got your municipal service corporation in a box resources to share with municipalities. That's phenomenal. For others who are interested in helping solve one of those balance sheet challenges, which is if you need to do something a little bit more flexibly, longer term, and have the flexibility of a utility model where you can do very bespoke cost allocation around benefits and do all of that over time. MSCs allow you that flexibility, arm's length from the municipality, but still publicly owned. So appreciate that it's and my experience with EPCOR, the City of Edmonton's utility crown company, is that you never know where that can go too. It's the largest private water provider in at least 3 American states in the South. So you may or may not have those ambitions, but if you can develop that expertise in these service corporations, they can also sometimes be relevant to adjacent municipalities or even communities in other places to help grow sustainable sources of revenue. So that's jumping a bit to long-term big picture solutions. But to your point, organizing that specific capacity and capital and flexible capital to solve a problem is a really creative answer to those balance sheet challenges. And the timing challenges, because this is work that right now it may be easier to defer, and there are often other priorities in the municipal capital plan that are a lot more visible than these kinds of works. But deferring work that's going to be needed as the weather gets worse is kind of rolling the dice, and that those works are only going to get more expensive. And one of the things that we want to help understand is what are the benefits and recognition that communities who take that proactive action should get in a variety of categories. Things like bond ratings. Agencies are starting to look at that sort of thing as what the underlying risk is in communities right now at larger geographies, but the data is getting so much richer all the time that it's going to become more and more granular over time, and communities that are taking action will be better cases for investment, not just for the capital needed to do the work and then subsequent, arenas and waterworks and other things that you'd have to do anyway, but also for private investment as well. And insurance, hopefully, for all kinds of stakeholders in the community, from business to homeowners to agriculture. So thank you for highlighting that leadership in Mapleton. It's really inspiring to see it coming from, again, a nimble and creative community that's willing to share. So pivoting now to some of the solutions that are available in addition to structuring things like municipal services corporations, some of the ways of dealing with the capital and timing challenges. There are a lot of other issues out there that are pressing. So one is, maybe one more word on a challenge, is that some of the municipalities that we had applications from, and I can't name them yet because we're not at that stage with them, but we did have a number of municipalities who came forward who had commitments from the existing DMAF funds, who now have ticking clocks on finding matching dollars for those. So that's one category of urgency that's imposed actually by the conditions of the grants. So that creates a need for timely funds and getting creative about mustering some capital to do the project before it gets any more expensive, and before the DMAF grants are potentially lost, and then finding a way maybe to spread those costs out over time. And a municipal service corporation is one way, debentures are another way. There are a variety of ways to solve that timing problem. And we know that some of the benefits of doing this work as the weather gets more severe will be out in the future years. So maybe there's room for creativity for some of the payback to come from that larger net present value of risk reduction over time. So that capital flexibility is the kind of thing that, again, to these asymmetrical timing issues, is one of the things that a municipal service corporation can potentially help solve in the case of something like that DMAF pinch. The other issue that we're hearing out there is municipalities are starting to pay close attention to the changing criteria for the disaster financial assistance arrangements, which now says you must be protected and take action to be protected up to a 1 in 200 year event. So we're also working with municipalities who are aware of that, and trying to get those works in place so that they will continue to maintain eligibility for DFAA, which will really be for the catastrophic events above 1 in 200. Because I think what really the federal government is signaling there is that it can't come in and pick up the pieces for what are becoming more frequent and routine events, because that risk profile is increasing across the country. So again, with each one of these challenges, we have to find solutions. And the FCM has worked closely with the federal government to develop an adaptation stream for Green Municipal Fund offerings, which Yi is going to tell us a little bit more about for the benefit of municipalities interested in grabbing some of that free support that's available, and concessionary support to advance their projects. So in adaptation and resilience. So Yi, over to you again.
Thanks, Don. The key initiative we have within the Green Municipal Fund is the local leadership for climate adaptation, really meant to support municipalities to act on climate adaptation in their communities. And it was made possible with generous support from the Government of Canada. Like other GMF streams, we have a mixture of funding and capacity building, and it's really meant to bridge that gap that we talked about thus far. So in terms of current offering, what we have is really helping municipalities build that foundation at the institutional level, so support around adaptation planning, climate risk assessments, and integrating a climate adaptation lens into asset management, as well as getting to action. So grants and support for feasibility studies and funding for smaller scale projects, all of which are kind of supported with GMF-led capacity development. And we also provide funding for partner organizations to give capacity development training and cohort arrangements as well. So we have some open opportunities, funding opportunities, and resources on our website, which I invite everyone to take a look at. And what's under development right now is that focus on increasing the private sector confidence in financing models for resilient infrastructure and projects. So really working with within the ecosystem with organizations like Co-operator, Addenda, and others to address some of the challenges we outlined, and engaging with municipalities and investors to understand their needs and concerns. So With this piece, we are really looking to keep, as always, municipalities at the heart of it all. So addressing the right hazards, developing the appropriate projects, and making sure that there is kind of the right complement. It is the right project and appropriate for private sector investments. If it kind of checks all those boxes and really makes sense, then looking at how we can support municipalities to be creative and nimble in understanding and communicating the benefits of their projects, creating those cash flows, and the structure so that it is bankable, and in whatever way we can to support the partnerships that are required to execute well. So that is what we're aiming to do. We have $150 million of dedicated resources that will go to municipalities in the form of grants, loans, credit enhancements, and capacity development. And it's really meant to be a spectrum of support. So really meeting municipalities where they are, whether they're very early on their journey or I think much further, like the projects that Patrick and Reeve Boronsky are kind of championing, and really trying to get to the point where we're helping plan, study, and pilot all the way to showcase projects, right? Real impact in these communities and real models that we can replicate and scale up. So when I hear something like MSC in a box, I think that really checks a lot of boxes for us in terms of the type of impact that we're trying to have. And on the GMF side, we're really exploring the role of GMF's concessionary capital to blend in private capital into these projects. Really, the thought is to bring them into projects that the private sector otherwise wouldn't be able to invest in, and to achieve greater benefits than what GMF can do alone. So that is really kind of the North Star that we're aiming to with this focus, as we continue to build that full bridge across the gap that we've outlined today. We will be launching aspects of the financing adaptation later this year. So I would invite everyone to stay updated with the FCM Connect newsletter. And if you have any specific projects or insights that you want to share with us, you can always reach out through our GMF mailbox as well. So thanks, Don. Over to you.
Thanks, Yi. Just a note, we are hoping to have some time for Q&A. So I see some questions starting to pop up in the chat. If you can put them in the Q&A panel, particularly, there's a button at the bottom of the Zoom window with Q&A on it. That will just help us queue them up and organize them, but feel free to start populating them as we carry on with the discussion here. This is complex stuff. This idea of blended finance, taking some concessionary non-repayable dollars from government and laying them in on top of the private sector capital so that you get to a cost of that capital that's comparable or potentially less to what your cost of borrowing would be, is one way that particularly the federal government has, through the Canadian Infrastructure Bank as well, started to try to attract more private capital into conventional infrastructure projects. And I think if you listen to the Prime Minister and look at his background and a lot of the signals that they sent in budget last year, I think they're looking for more of that. And the Ontario government also has the Building Ontario Fund, which takes a similar approach across a wide set of categories. And both of them have at least the flexibility, if not the explicit encouragement, in the case of the Infrastructure Bank, to consider blended finance and support. Now, their mandates may be larger than some of the projects you're looking at, but our lab is interested in helping to prototype smaller projects on the premise that there are many other communities who are going to need them, and that they could be bundled up and turned into larger portfolios of investments that, again, would attract insurers, pension funds, and others. And this is a priority for the federal government in terms of mobilizing capital for investment in Canada. So this is a way FCM is helping, and our lab is helping to try to support municipalities who are open to that. blended finance option. And just another word on private finance. I mean, that could include debt on very flexible terms. If you need bridge financing, again, to finish a DMAF project, it could include debt on longer terms than you might be able to get through your municipal finance authority in provinces that have those. There's opportunities for debt-like instruments to be performance linked. So there's opportunities for some risk transfer and potentially for some of the private capital to be specifically attached to resilience enhancing features, say adding a cooling loop to a district energy system that improves the performance of the utility and its cash flow potential, but also requires more investment to do. So the incremental cost of increasing the adaptation and resilience capacity of something could be specifically financed potentially with private finance. And that's the sort of thing our lab and GMF are very interested in identifying. So it might be an asset whose primary purpose is defense against a climate-related risk, or it might be an asset that needs a little bit of extra money to build it right, to build it strong for the weather, or deal with air handling or cooling or something else to deal with smoke or heat risks, for example. So there's lots of flexibility, lots of room for creativity. And finally, it can include equity where municipalities are willing to share, and this is not a requirement or an instruction to do this, but there are rooms in various partnership models for equity with a higher expectation of return, but also a more significant transfer of risk. So there's really a whole continuum of private capital opportunities out there, but people usually go to P3s when there's actually all of these other things I just mentioned. So now we're going to, with all that said, turn to hear from Reeve Goronsky about the really creative project unfolding in Stewartburn.
Thank you very much, Don. It's fascinating to see where all of this is going. It's very interesting. So a little history, like I said, we've had water issues in the RM of Stewartburn for as long as I can remember. I've lived there for 50 years, and there's always been water. It's either fire, water, or flood. Something is happening. With a lot of folks call them water issues. We want to turn them into water solutions for our neighboring municipalities that struggle having enough water. We want to be able to harness the water that comes into our municipality from the United States and from the east side of our province along from the Ontario border through one of the neighboring municipalities to us as well. And we want to start capturing that water and putting it to some good use, making sure that we recognize water is one of the biggest resources we've got, and we need to make sure that we're moving it forward in a productive way. We are built on natural swamps and bogs. So we are a huge area of aquifer, and I have been petitioning our province now for a while to recognize that we are aquifer so that we can have protection of the waters. We want to be able to look at not only the drainage system that comes in, but where the water is supposed to be going and how to make sure that we are not moving water in a way that is hurting and harming our neighboring municipalities on the north and the west side of us as well. So we've started a few things along the way. We've just begun tree harvesting in the municipality. We've seen some major corporations come in and start bulldozing down the trees, and that is causing worse water issues and is also destroying the natural bog and waters that are there. So we've started on the municipal lands where we are tree harvesting, and that is a renewable resource that we can actually harvest every 10 years. It allows water to stay where it's supposed to be. The root system of the trees actually help to clean out water and to make sure that any waters leaving our municipality is clean and can move forward in a good way where we're not moving phosphorus into other areas. We also just received a grant, and we're looking at harvesting cattails and those sort of things in our area. We just got a grant from the Canadian Urban Institute to do a feasibility study on starting to harvest the cattails. So one of the major things that we looked at, instead of doing Band-Aids, the municipalities come together and we hired strategic engineering, which Dr. Hank Venema is the lead in that. He's the owner. And we are mapping out the water throughout the whole municipality, not just where some of the issues happen to be today and putting a Band-Aid on that, but where the mapping is, where the water comes from, where it's supposed to go, what infrastructure is in place that's working, what isn't working, and what we need to be able to build as well, and partnering up with the province and making sure that their provincial drain system is working conjunctively with us to make sure it's moving together. So we've got that. I'm not sure what else to actually say. Then, we are looking at, can we harvest the water? Can we, put it to good use, making sure the water that leaves our municipality eventually ends up in Lake Winnipeg, and Lake Winnipeg is dying already from the phosphorus and stuff. So how can we start as a very small municipality, be an example for the bigger municipalities on how we move this forward in a very productive way?
That's amazing leadership, and I love the background behind you. It sort of also tells the story of what the values are in your community that are driving this creativity. And maybe I'll ask to you a question just to expand a little bit and harvest a couple of the questions from the Q&A here already. And please add more. We've got a couple more in the direct chat as well. But one of the questions is, could folks elaborate on what would be the revenue stream for payback? And so you talked about biomass harvesting would be
Yes.
one. What are you thinking in terms of agreements with downstream municipalities and others who would potentially see value in the water quality and water quantity improvements? Or what sort of arrangements would you anticipate or hope for that would generate cash flow for the project?
Well, we've already tapped in, and we've talked to a few of the municipalities around. We've worked a bit in the past through our water district, and we had one major plan that we were looking at doing, and we call it the Sundown Bog. And neighboring municipalities actually started to commit funds to it. Us ourselves have committed land to it. We've committed dollars to it, but we're looking to expand that. To the west of us, we have municipalities that are very dry. They need water. And I jokingly, whenever I see them, I say, stay tuned. We're going to have water to sell you very shortly. So, we see that as a revenue as well. And then doing the tree harvesting. In 2 months, the municipality made a little over $100,000, and we didn't get 1/4 section cleaned off. That also provides us with fire barriers. When you are cleaning off the dead brush and the older stuff, you are actually then taking away fire fuel. So we're looking at that as being a positive as well. And when you are able to take away dead brush and you're taking away the trees that are starting to die on you, it actually allows the regrowth of newer stuff, which again cleans the water, allows the water system to move in a very positive way. I've been down in the States watching what they're doing in Roseau, Minnesota. I sit as the Canadian side of the international in Manitoba for that in our corner. And it's amazing to me what they are doing, just in a simple thing, putting the river back into the natural flow of it. In 100 years ago, everybody thought that they knew what they would do was going to benefit. But to be able to put things back in its natural flow and recognizing that nature has the best way to clean out water, make sure that water's moving in the best way that it can. So it's been an eye opener for sure, and it's exciting the direction that things are going in.
Well, and hearing from and meeting Dr. Venema, who you mentioned has been doing some of the technical work on this out of Winnipeg, he has a great illustration of, on the prairies, you have lots of water in the spring and then not a lot of water in the summer. And with climate models, the instance of water in the spring is getting higher and the instance of drought in the summer is getting more severe. And so the idea of being able to take water and keep it and improve its quality when it's abundant, rather than just push it downstream to someone else, hoping that it doesn't create damage. If you can figure out how to retain that and then release it to folks who need it later in the season using nature. And then that may or may not pay for itself on its own. But when you start to layer in those other biomass recoveries, and I'm glad you mentioned the third point, which is really ecological restoration and risk reduction of fuels in forested areas, where our lab is doing a lot of work in British Columbia with a number of communities who have severe wildfire risk. And it's the same thing. The biomass alone won't pay for it. The timber alone won't pay for it. But when you start to look at things like the hydrological benefits of improved water quality and runoff, and you start to get creative about stacking 2 or 3 of those revenue sources, now maybe it becomes viable. And you still couldn't pay for it all up front. But if you then take the benefits over something like a 20-year program of work and finance that, and engage contractors where appropriate, transfer risk to the private sector, look for scale where it's appropriate, keep what's public needs to be public, and engage partners in the private sector to do the rest. That's where we can find kind of, at this point, bespoke solutions, but hopefully those become scalable to other similar areas. So thanks so much for sharing, Reeve Baronski, what's happening there. Just wanted to put the same question back to Patrick a little bit about revenue sources that you would imagine to help pay back resilient infrastructure investments in Mapleton.
Yeah, sure. I'm glad to get the opportunity to speak to it. It is interesting because with resilient infrastructure, it's got to be a different model than water and wastewater infrastructure, where we have user rates already in place for collecting the payback on it. I say with the resilient infrastructure, we have to look into opportunities like local improvement charges. I think that was mentioned in the chat there somewhere. Also, we could use development charges if the work we do on the infrastructure, in our case, it's going to be upgrading, expanding the dike infrastructure downtown. If the work we end up doing there allows for previously undevelopable lands to become developable and we can grow in those areas, then development charges would be applicable and they could help with the payback. I think a key piece, though, also is not specifically the money coming in, new money coming in from places, but also the cost avoidance of what this infrastructure is going to do for us, the amount of downtime, the amount of staffing resource to get deployed during a major flood event, the impact to the economy specifically from it is our downtown core that gets wiped out with floods and that shutdown. So there is a lot of cost avoidance that would be a part of it too for the payback, but we need to be creative because you can't, with it being a relatively small group that's in the benefiting area, the cost could be significant on each individual property owner through a local improvement charge regime. But again, that's why we look at every solution. We look at every financial model, and we're going to find one that will work, because just saying it's not affordable and we can't do it, I don't think that's the solution. We need to find a way to get it done. It's been sitting there as a problem for many years, and we're going to tackle it in the best way possible.
And depending on the province, there are other tools available for land value capture, sometimes called tax increment financing. Sometimes they go by other names, but essentially by enabling and encouraging more development, and if that's only made possible, or you can tie a catalytic value or an enabling value to an investment. In Edmonton, it was a hockey rink, but the idea of applying and those tools are often used for things like sports facilities and downtown revitalization context. But I think there's huge potential for thinking about land value capture instruments. And we've got a couple of municipalities in the call for proposals who are looking at that as another potential cash flow source to help pay back the infrastructure that opens up development in an area that would otherwise be too risky, or enables reinvestment in an area where the risk has become known, often through repeated disasters, right? And so again, that might not pay for it on its own, but when you start to stack in cost avoidances and model those out, and potentially charge some other fees through utilities that have a business case to them in terms of avoiding damage to infrastructure, avoiding disruption to the municipality. And then ideally, there will still be dollars from provinces and federal governments. But I think the point is, if we all wait for 100% dollars to come to do all of these projects, very, very few of them are going to be done. One of the other things that we've observed is from talking to some of the consulting engineering firms, is that a lot of municipalities, larger ones particularly, are sizing their works to what they think they can get out of the DMAF program. And so you might have like a 3-phase project that only works after the 3rd phase that's been broken into 3 chunks to try to get 3 tranches of DMAF to get it done. And best case scenario, you get yes 3 times in a row in a program that was 9 times oversubscribed, but that's really rolling the dice. Now you can say, hey, we applied, but and we didn't get the support. But I really admire municipalities like the ones we've had a chance to hear from today, who said, let's get on with it. Let's get creative, because that's what we're going to need at all scales and across multiple perils, like we've talked about here today. Now,
if I could add on to that,
sure,
Don, just 1 second. Like the grant, or I think there's a direct tie to us taking these risks, us putting our foot forward and finding a new way to do it, and our success in some of the grant funding tools as well. Like we've been successful in some of the housing enabling fund stuff that are happening in Ontario, and I think there might be a direct link to the fact that Mapleton was willing to find a solution, not just sit and wait for the government to give us money from above. So I do agree with you that taking those steps, being creative, puts a better face to the municipality when you go out seeking supports. And we were successful in our DMAF application for one of the 3 projects, not for all 3, but one of them. So it does work out.
That's right. I think governments are looking for this creativity. That's the signal we keep seeing from the federal government. So one question here for Reeve Goronsky about the tree harvesting and how it's linked to preserving water. The thought is it sounds counterintuitive. So maybe say a little bit more about how the tree harvesting is linked to the water quality benefits.
I can, for sure. Thank you for that. When you harvest the trees, rather than bulldoze them down, where you get rid of their root system, when you harvest and you leave the root system there, and you leave area and space for new growth to come in, it actually helps to retain the fluid and keeps the soil healthy in that area. So when you've got sections of land that have a healthy root system and have healthy soil, that actually helps to keep the water clean as well, because then you have bogs that are sitting there, they don't move on. If you start pushing it down with bulldozers, you end up moving water, and your bog system leaves and all of that. So it is very important to be able to recognize that as well. I'm sorry, folks, I'm in a hotel right now, so terribly sorry.
It's all good.
Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and nature can provide multiple services, and we're only just now getting better at counting the value of those. The Institute for Sustainable Development has done, which is Canadian based, has done some great analysis in this area, and the Climate Risk Institute and others are starting to figure out how do we value nature and all of the things that it can do for us and integrate it into this work. So it's great to see that kind of work being applied in your community. So there's one other quick question here. It's a little more of a technical question about permeable pavements and the potential to support infrastructure resilience, flood mitigation, and improved water quality. I'm not sure if there's anything in your plan, Patrick, or anything you want to say, Yi, about those kinds of particular solutions and their eligibility. Is that part of what you're thinking for water management in Mapleton, Patrick?
So we're kind of right at the start of this entire process of looking at what our preferred approach to water management is going to end up being for down there. So every option pretty much is on the table. That's not one that we've discussed specifically at this point, but I think as we get into the works, we're doing works with our consulting engineers at SEMA Plus. They're doing a bunch of the pre-work for us to understand the options that are available for it. But I obviously would think any option that's possible to move forward with that is going to be sustainable, not something that we put in and then it ends up costing us a bunch more to maintain it over time. I'd want to be sure about that, but right now we're open and exploring any possible thing to reduce the flood risk down there. So permeable may be one of the options we explore.
Yeah, and maybe quickly on the FCM side, I think permeable um, I think those kind of solutions would be components of a solution that we would want to explore with the municipality. Really, I really appreciated that. I think in both of these cases, it's a systems view of what are the interactions, what are the benefits that together all these components of a solution can create, and then how do we build a financing structure around it to bring in the private investment. So we would definitely be interested in that being a component of anything if it makes sense for the community.
See, Evans popped on. I'll hand it back to him to close this off in a minute here. But there was one more neat question about municipal service corporations where they're council owned. Is there a risk of political suppression of rates? And that's really an important governance question in setting up and how you manage utility rates. And in Edmonton, just to give you one example, we had the corporation bring rate proposals forward through a utility rate setting process that a utility committee of council that was separately advised looked at. And so there was sort of role clarity about when council was in its utility regulator role, which was mindful of impacts and rates to consumers, but also mindful of the efficacy of the and success of the utility. And so there are governance answers to that one. It's a longer story, but it's a great question. So thanks to everyone for attending today. Thank you especially to Reeve Baranski and Patrick and Yi for sharing their wisdom. And over to you, Evan, to close us out.
Yeah, just echo those thanks. Thank you, Reeve, Patrick, Yi, Don. This was great. Thank you for sharing those ideas and options with FCM's members today. As I mentioned, the recording of today's conversation will be posted to fcm.ca in the coming days and sent to all registrants by email. And that's it for the 2025-2026 FCM Collective webinar series. And if you've enjoyed today's conversation and others in the series, the 2026 series will kick off again in September. In the meantime, we hope you'll join us for the 2026 FCM Annual Conference and Trade Show in Edmonton on June 4th through 7th. Today is the last day for early bird registration, so please make that call today if you want to save a few dollars for your municipality for registration. Thank you all for participating. Be well, everyone.